This is chewy, cheesy bacon bread, and it basically does what it says on the tin. It's a chewy Asian-style bread stuffed with cheese and bacon, with the crust topped with even more cheese because why not? It's obviously pretty delicious, but for a channel called Chinese Cooking Demystified, I do know that we probably got a bit of explaining to do here. Because, when you think about Chinese food, I'd imagine that bacon bread is pretty far from the first thing that'd pop into your head. Now, of course, before we get into it, I do think that it bears repeating that there are plenty of traditional baked goods in China that date way back before contact with the West, like mooncakes, xiaobing, taosu. It's not like this is a culture that's never heard of ovens before. That said, the first wave of Western-style breads in China came to the country in the form of Hong Kong-style bakeries. You might have actually tried these sorts of bakeries before, as they're also around in Chinatowns in the West. They serve up this great mix of more traditional fare like steamed buns, together with Western-inspired Cantonese classics like pineapple and hot dog buns. Then the second big wave of bakeries came post-WTO entrance in the form of Taiwan-style bakeries. These were first introduced to the mainland in the form of chains like 85 Degrees, though these days there's plenty of more mom-and-pop affairs as well. Taiwan-style bakeries can sort of be thought of as a blend of Cantonese and Japanese-style bakeries. You can find your hot dog buns, of course, but also in the mix are more Japanese-inspired fare like chewy milk bread and fluffy cheesecake. Then finally, these days, in about the past 5 years or so, in coastal China especially, we're starting to see what we consider to be a third wave of bakeries opening up, this time a bit more Western-inspired. You see, I think it's pretty common knowledge that over the past decade or so, large swaths of Chinese students went to the US, UK, and Canada for university. But much less well internalized in people's heads, I think, is that generation of students has, generally speaking, come back. And with them, they've helped bring back a culture of American-style microbrews, trendy coffee shops with single-source pour-overs, and, well, bakeries. These sorts of newer bakeries can sort of be thought of as a blend between the Taiwan style and a more Western-style shop. They've got the mandatory chewy milk bread, of course, but they've also got pretzels, croissants, and also a couple wacky adaptations like this soft, chewy bagel that some foreigners here have already started to dub the chagel. We've got one of these sorts of bakeries right downstairs from us, and while Steph always likes to order a plain croissant, I just can't help but order their chewy, cheesy bacon bread. For some reason, it always hits the spot for the American in my heart. So, that's what we wanted to show you how to make today. Steph's recreation of our local bakery's chewy, cheesy bacon bread. The stuff is super addictive, so let me hand it off to her to teach you how to make it.
So right, let's make some chewy, cheesy bacon bread. And I think we can use this chance to talk a little bit about some key elements in making meal bread, including flour type, Tangzhong, and kneading techniques. Well, let's talk about flour first. Put simply, there are usually two metrics to differentiate different kinds of flours: protein and ash content. In Asia and US, protein is used to group flours, high for bread, low for cake, and AP for everything else. While in France and Germany, ash content is usually what's used to group different kinds of flours. The higher the number, the higher the ash content. When I tried to make meal bread before using random bread flour, I was always very frustrated on how not soft it is. And then someday I swapped to Japanese bread flour, and all of a sudden, magic happened. The bread just become perfectly soft and chewy with the exact same recipe. But why? As I started my quest of comparing Japanese bread flour to other types of flour, the answer seems to lie in ash content. High ash content gives our bread that beautiful crust. But that's not what we want in meal bread. We want softness. So in order to achieve that, Japan produces certain types of flour that's high in gluten and low in ash content. The one I like to use is Genuine, produced by Torigo. It got 11.9% protein and only less than 0.4% ash content. And after scouting around, it seems that 00 flour is similarly high in protein and low in ash content. So if your milk bread is strangely not soft enough after you got all the techniques right, maybe try switching to a different type of flour. In addition to ash content, water absorption is another variable and it's mostly affected by how fine the flour is melt. So before jumping into a recipe, it will be better to know your flour first. For example, here we are mixing 1 part flour with 1 part water and do a 20-minute autolyse. And here we can take a look. This is the Japanese bread flour made by Toriko that I use. As you can see, it forms into a ball and just holds really well. And this is our usual baozi flour. It's kind of gloopy, lies flat in the bowl. This is obviously too much water. And same with the supermarket high gluten flour. It kind of also gloopy and it's just too much water. If you're not sure about your flour absorption, do the same test. But the 00 flour that we recommended earlier, it's also finely milled and has a relatively high absorption rate. Next, let's talk about Tangzhong. Tangzhong seems to be something that's an overly mystified technique in the Anglosphere, so let's clear the air a bit. If you're familiar with the Chinese language, you might have already been wondering where does this technique come from? Because the word Tangzhong sounds pretty Mandarin. And in fact, it is a Mandarin word because the Japanese pronunciation for this two kanji, it's udane. So there is a Japanese Tangzhong and there is a Chinese Tangzhong, but they are the same idea at its core. For the Japanese version, you might already know it's cooking 1 part flour with 5 part water till it reaches 65 centigrade, while the Chinese version, it's mixing 1 part flour with 1 part hot boiled water and form it into a dough. We'll be doing the Chinese version today, but same. Just know that Tangzhong is not gonna magically make your bread soft and chewy on its own. It helps, but 90% of the final texture actually comes from how well you knead and shape your dough. So after settling 2 main points, we can finally start. High-level overview first. Today we are using the straight dough method. We'll be making a Chinese Tangzhong, then mix and knead till we reach that smooth film stage, and then bulk ferment, roll, shape, and lastly, proof and bake. First, we'll make a Tangzhong. Just pour in 60-gram boiling water into 50-gram flour, then stir well into a homogeneous smooth ball, then cover and let it cool down completely. After the Tangzhong cools down, we can start making the dough. To a stand mixer, toss in all of the Tangzhong, 150-gram flour, 3 grams or 3/4 of teaspoon osmotolerant yeast, 60-gram sugar, 2 grams salt, and wet ingredients of 50 grams water, 30 gram heavy cream, and 10 gram honey for a bit more fragrance. Start on speed 1 to mix everything together. During this time, take a look at your flour. If there's still some dry flour hanging around after all the water is mixed in, then add a little bit more water in, 1 teaspoon at a time. For this recipe, I set aside an extra 20 grams of water for this adjusting purpose and use it all up. Depending on your flour, you may or may not need to add this extra bit. Once everything's combined, we can start the actual kneading process. We'll be kneading the dough on medium and high speed to help develop the gluten. If you're worried that kneading it on a speed higher than 2 would risk breaking your stand mixer, you can also just knead it for 10 minutes on 2 and then finishing the dough by slapping it for 200 to 300 times on your counter. So we'll begin at medium speed. For me, it's 4 on this mixer. After 5 to 6 minutes of kneading, we can pull a small piece out. See if it can start to stretch a bit and form a thick sheet like this. If yes, then we can add in 20 grams softened butter. Mix on speed 1 to let the butter incorporate. Once there's no butter remained, turn the speed back on medium and let it go for another 5 to 6 minutes. After that time, take one piece out and see if it can stretch into a thinner but uneven film, something like this. If yes, then we are ready to finish kneading the dough on high speed, which mimics slapping the dough on the counter, but only you don't need to destroy your shoulder. So now turn the speed to high. For me, it's 6 on this mixer. Knead it for 1 to 2 minutes and it should be fine. Stop the mixer, check the dough for final gluten development. This is known as the Windowpane Test. It usually calls for stretching a dough into a film without breaking. This works for sourdough kind of bread, but for chewy meal bread, we also need to look for translucency and how the dough breaks. So just take a piece, evenly stretch it out, and you should be able to get something so thin that you can see your fingers through it. That's referred to as glove-like membranes in Chinese, as in latex glove. And if you poke a hole in it, the opening would be smooth and round like this. A translucent film and a round, smooth hole means that the gluten is ready. Now just take a bowl, oil it, take out the dough, and as you can see, it can really stretch if the gluten is developed to the point. Now give it a couple folds and round it into a ball. Put it into the oil bowl, cover, and let it ferment till it doubles in size. For reference, after 1.5 hours at 28 degrees Celsius, our dough's ready. Now slightly dust your dough and work surface. Gently take it out and press out some air. Weigh and divide it into 2 even pieces. It's better to weigh and portion so that they stay in the same size and the final result will look nice and even. Now take one of the dough, smooth side facing up, roll it into a oblongish piece about 1 centimeter thick, then flip, roll it into a log, and repeat the same process with the other half of the dough, and then set both the sides, cover, and let them rest for half an hour. Half an hour later, we can do the final shaping. Oil a 20 centimeter by 11 centimeter tin first and set aside. Now take one log, gently press it down, evenly roll it into a 1 centimeter thick pieces that's about 30 centimeter long and 6 centimeter wide. Now flip, press along the edge to get rid of big air bubbles and pinch down the side close to you for easier sealing. Then lay a strip of bacon onto the sheet. We are doing 2 to 3 strips per log, but you can dial it back to 1 or 2. Today we are using some Chinese bacon, and as you can see, it's very elaborate. And in our opinion, the closest in the West would be back bacon, aka Canadian bacon. After laying down the bacon, grab some sheet cheese, tear it in half and lay it on top of the bacon. We are doing 1.5 sheets per log here. After arranging the cheese and bacon, take the far side, gently but tightly roll inwards, then pinch to seal the edge. If you're aggressive with the fillings like we do, gently pinch both sides slightly to close it up. Now put it into one side of the oil tin, leave some room on the side for it to expand. Then take out the other log, repeat the same process, then put it into the other side of the tin. If you find this a little bit confusing, check out the uncut video up here for a slower demonstration. Now both logs are ready. Put it in a bag at proof for 1.5 hours at 30 degrees Celsius. If your room temperature is lower, just proof it till it takes up 70% of your tin. Something like this. When the dough's done proving, bake it in a preheated oven at 180 degrees Celsius for 35 minutes. When it's 15 minutes in, quickly sprinkle about a 1/4 cup of shredded cheese on top and put it back to finish baking. Once it's done, immediately take it out and knock the tin on the counter a couple times to break the big air bubbles inside. Then tilt it and gently slide it out on your cooling rack. At this stage, it's still very soft, so try not to move it around too much. And then let it sit there and cool down for at least 1 hour before cutting or eating. And with that, your Chinese bakery style chewy, cheesy bacon bread, it's done. So, I'm quite obsessed with bread making. And one of the reasons why I find this kind of Asian style chewy bread very fascinating is that although this kind of bread it's originally a Western concept, but the endless pursuit and obsession about chewiness and the techniques involved feels very Asian or Chinese to me. For me, this is Western in appearance, but Asian in spirit, and plus super fun to play around with. So yeah, as always, check out the recipe in description box and more notes in the pinned comment. Thank you for everyone that's supporting us on Patreon, and of course, don't forget to subscribe for more Chinese cooking videos. Oh. You like bread too?